started to just get so heated politically that when people will be in a conversation with me and say, "Oh, I hate those Democrats," it's like you're talking about a couple of my kids,
Yeah.
right? "Oh, I hate those Republicans." It's like, well, I'm a Republican.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't hate one of these parties that's not yours and not be talking about someone in my family.
That's to me the hardest thing when you have a conversation with someone is where are the boundaries here? How powerful can I be in this conversation? And how powerful can the other person be? How can we
Right.
maintain each of our sense of dignity or self, sense of self, sense of what we think is right and wrong?
Contempt sells.
Yeah.
Contempt makes you money. It gets you rich. It gets you clicks. It gets you likes. The headlines, newspapers go out of business if they don't have enough readers now because of the whole subscription model. So people need contempt to make money. And our overarching goal is to make contempt
It's an
backfire.
era of change, of ideals and cultures constantly colliding. We need brave people who will find the way of hope in the chaos, who will elevate truth in their speech and activate reform in their lives. Leigh Sloan welcomes you to this brave nation.
Hello, Brave Nation. I am very excited today. I've been trying to get this particular guest on the podcast for a few months now. I actually met her a few months ago, and she and I are kind of operating with the same heart. You've heard me talk a lot about having brave conversations and coming to the table, treating people with dignity and valuing people and not descending into what I call toxic tribalism. And so I'm really excited to have our guest today, Tami Pyfer. She is the co-creator of the Dignity Index, and you will learn more about the Dignity Index today. And she is the Chief External Relations Officer at Unite, which is their nonprofit that started the Dignity Index. And one more thing that I didn't know until today was that she is USA Today's Woman of the Year for Utah. So we're just honored to have you at Brave Nation and welcome.
This is my first interview with that award or having that recognition.
Awesome.
So thank you for having me.
Yeah, welcome. And so the Dignity Index, this is just such a fascinating thing. And I think I mentioned it on a previous podcast when I was talking to another guest. I love this concept because I mean we could all say, oh, be nice to each other. Like we learned this in kindergarten, we should be nice to each other. But when it plays out in real life, it's like, well, how? How are we doing this? And I think the Dignity Index, and it's dignity dot, what is it again? The
Dignity.us. And
US.
I'm just going to grab my card really quick.
Yep. Dignity.us. So you really give us some really practical tools on how to come to the table with health and dignity and keeping our relationships intact. So what inspired you guys to come up with this idea? Just tell me a little bit more.
Well, when I was in my last couple of years in the governor's office, I was his Governor Herbert's in Utah, his education policy advisor during the last 7 years of his term, and those last couple of years got to be just really difficult as far as education issues. It just seemed like we went from one controversial thing to another. It was, if it was the Common Core, then social emotional learning or critical race theory, and you name it, things that really, I think, had been mislabeled to a large degree by people. And so they became super controversial because the language wasn't matching exactly what was happening in schools. And so the last couple of years got to be pretty tough for me in trying to overcome some of these divides in schools. And as I finished my time with the governor, I met Tim Shriver, who is the chair of Special Olympics. And he had, as I was finishing the governor's office, he had just started gathering people to figure out how we could solve the country's toxic political divides. And I was at a luncheon that he spoke at in Salt Lake City, where he said, what if we apply, the principles that we're teaching kids of social, and emotional intelligence and learning? What if we applied these problem-solving skills to politics? And it was just like this huge, these flashing lights went off in my brain. It's like, why couldn't we teach these skills that we teach kids on how to approach differences in a different way, disagree without being disagreeable? I mean, they teach that in a lot of history, classes, and problem solving with diverse groups of people, working across divides, self-regulation, how to not, scream at your classmate and instead say, what did you mean by that? What if we took those skills and taught them to politicians? We applied that to politics. And so that kind of sparked my interest at the very start. And so when I left the governor's office, I joined Tim Shriver and another colleague, Tom Roschert, who had been working on what was ours to do. And as we studied what we could be doing, we kind of morphed into this idea of dignity. And what if we had a way to measure the dignity that was in our public discourse, political discourse, even just in our, in our associations with each other in our workplaces? And that's the beginning of the Dignity Index. And so that's what we did. We created a scale to measure how we do when we are in these conversations where we disagree with each other.
And I love that word dignity. It seems like it resonates with people a lot more than like unity or some of the other words that you get. Did you find that to be true?
Yes, even, the name of the nonprofit is Unite, which was, the paperwork and everything was done in like 2018 or 2019. And a lot of people are immediately turned off by that. We learned it's like you unite, you just want me to give up my principles and my passion, my power, and join with them or give in, and just be nice so we can all get along. We can go along to get along. And it's like that word we found does not resonate with people. And the funny thing is that's not at all what we meant by that. And dignity does resonate. At one point, actually, Leigh, we had thought of calling it the Unity Index, but again, that's not, it didn't capture what we were trying to get at, which is the fact that everything else aside, every one of us is a human being, and therefore we deserve to be treated with dignity, with this basic level of human dignity. And that word has resonated with people.
Right.
People seem to be able to understand that,
Right.
innately.
Because when you think about unite, it's like get in line, kind of like it has this sense
Get
of
in
like
line.
or else,
Yes,
unite or else,
exactly.
and it's
Yeah.
Big Brother's watching and everything.
Yeah.
But but as far as the boundaries go, that's to me the hardest thing when you have a conversation with someone is where are the boundaries here? How powerful can I be in this conversation? And how powerful can the other person be? How can we
Right.
maintain each of our sense of dignity or self, sense of self, sense of what we think is right and wrong? And I feel like people let their guard down or they're able to work with easier when they know what their power is and they can hold on to that power.
I think that's right. That's a really good way to frame that as well. I've heard this phrase that we don't seek for common ground, but we seek for higher ground. And when you're treating people with dignity and you come to an impasse, at like a level 7 on our scale, the scale goes from 1 to 8. At this, almost at the highest level, a 7 is when we are looking for those things that we disagree on. So if you and I disagree strongly on something, instead of just saying, okay, we're going to compromise, what I do is I develop a relationship with you. I find out, tell me how you came to that view, and I want to learn as much as I can about you and that view, and you about me, so that then we start to problem solve. And it's not just a matter of, okay, well, we'll compromise. It's like, okay, common ground's great, but let's find higher ground. How can we take that and build something that's even better than either one of us had thought of to begin with? And that's what I think, if you start to practice these dignity principles, that's what you get to is beyond common ground to higher ground.
That's really good. I'm going to start using that.
It's not original to me. I heard it and it's like, that's exactly how I feel.
It's really good. And and then I started using the word toxic tribalism because I'm thinking, okay, what do we want to get away from? And we always say, well, we don't want to get political. A lot of people say, I don't want to get political. Well, I know politics has become a negative word, but we are political. Like, I mean, we have our opinions and it affects our governments. And to me, just saying we're not political isn't really cutting it, because then how I phrase it is that we put our white gloves on and then we don't want to touch it because I'm not political.
Yeah.
but we need tools to get in there because I don't think that ignoring it is helping.
No, I agree. Ignoring it is not helping. And for people like us, for me, a large part of my life has been political, from PTA president, which is that's it can be very political, not even in the Republican Democrat sense, but I mean, it's politics. Working
Right,
with people, problem solving is politics.
right,
And PTA president, city council, state school board, governor's office, so much of who I am has been influenced by politics. And so when I have to take that out of my personal interactions or conversations, I leave a big chunk of myself behind.
right,
And that's what we kind of started to feel when we were working with the dignity indexes. Let's bring all of us, let's have all of us bring our whole selves to conversations and to the table. And back when politics wasn't so toxic, that was easy to do.
right. Yeah, and like in my family, we were encouraged to go toward each other and to disagree. We were, especially the Italian side of my family, we were very much encouraged to debate and to do it passionately.
Yeah.
And so I kind of grew up with that model, but I realize a lot of people don't. A lot of people aren't allowed to do that in their families or disagree, especially with the authority figures in their family. So how do you help people to kind of cross that barrier when it's not taught to them?
Yeah. Well, and to your point, I think back in the day, our political identity wasn't the end all. Right now,
Mhm.
that's like everyone labels us. That's our label that we carry. Back in the day, I couldn't tell you what my neighbor's political party was. I didn't know
Mhm.
what my parents' party was for a very long time. So that was just a little part of who we are. But now it seems like it's everything. I mean, that's it. I'm going to label you, and then I'm going to ascribe every negative quality I can think of to you if you happen to not belong to my party.
Right. And
And
those people, right?
those people, and yeah, Tim, my colleague, says whenever we say those people, we have to remember that we're those people.
Right.
We're those people. So
You have a lot of diversity in your family, right? Political
we
diversity.
do. I've got 5 adult kids, all married with families of their own, and I have a Republican, an independent, Democrat, a Democratic Socialist, and a Libertarian. I've got those 5 bases covered, and I always thought it was pretty cool that they all kind of grew up and found their own way in politics, that they found someone who inspired them, whether it was with my party or not. I'm a moderate Republican. My husband's a very conservative Republican. But I just was cool that things that kind of excited them or that they kind of picked out of the different parties. And it was really cool until it wasn't really cool. And in the last maybe, I'm going to say 8 years, 8, 9 years or so, maybe 10 years, things started to just get so heated politically that when people will be in a conversation with me and say, "Oh, I hate those Democrats," it's like, you're talking about a couple of my kids,
Yeah.
right? "Oh, I hate those Republicans." It's like, well, I'm a Republican.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't hate one of these parties that's not yours and not be talking about someone in my family. And
True.
that's why it became very personal to me. Not only the difficulties we had in the governor's office, over the last few years, but even before that, being in rooms where people are making fun of those people. It's like, those people are my kids.
Yeah. And I mean that's why I think I like to refer to it as a brave conversation because it's not a safe space when you get into I mean we want to create as much safety as possible or as much dignity as preserve as much dignity as possible, but we are risking something when we move toward one another because
Yeah.
not everyone can handle, I don't think, a brave conversation. And so I think
Well,
we do
you
risk
talk.
relationships. Mhm.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to interrupt you. You talked about, tribalism, and I think some of this comes from this sense of belonging that we feel belonging to that political party. That's our tribe. So we feel a sense of belonging there, but we find ourselves in situations where if we dare step out of that and say something nice about someone else, then we're risking the belonging that we have in our own tribe. One of the quotes that we use for an example of a 6 on the dignity scale, which is on the dignity side, is during the 2008 elections and Barack Obama and John McCain. And John McCain had said, "I believe that this is a land of opportunity and we all, want this, if we have the will to pursue something to that effect. And he said, my opponent believes the same thing. So he was saying, I believe this. My Democratic opponent believes the same thing. He got booed. He was in a room full of Republicans and got booed by people. It was like, how dare you find something in common with the other side? And if I have time for another example, I was at our state Republican convention a couple of years ago, and I was going in and I registered, and a very nice, gentleman was kind of ushering us to where we had to go to register. And he said, I need you to step down here and I need you to sign in. He said, we're not like those Democrats. We need you to show ID. And it just sort of struck me wrong. And I went and registered and I came back to him and I said, my son's a Democrat, Democratic Social. My daughter's a Democrat. I said, it kind of hurts my feelings when you say that because they're really good people. And he said, oh, my daughter's a Democrat too. I said, oh, so is she a good person? He said, oh yeah, she's a great person. I said, so when you say that, I said, I know you're joking, but when you say that, it kind of hurts my feelings because they're good people too. And then he talked to me for like 5 minutes about how cool his daughter was. Yeah. So it's kind of these throwaway lines that we use, or we feel like I have to say that because that's the cost of membership in this party, is that I'm going to have to say something negative about the other people. And we're trying to teach people you don't have to do that.
Right. And our society really, I mean, whether it's our political systems or our media, it really feeds this because you won't get the clicks, you won't get the
right.
Conversations like ours might not be the highest trending conversation because
that's right.
It's not as fun to watch for people.
Contempt sells. Yeah. Contempt makes you money. It gets you rich. It gets you clicks. It gets you likes. The headlines, newspapers go out of business if they don't have enough readers now because of the whole subscription model. So people need contempt to make money. And our overarching goal is to make contempt backfire. We want people to get used to the language of dignity so that they start to see it and they start to have this, what we call the ick factor, to where when you hear it, it's like, oh, I don't like that anymore. And if that's the way you're going to behave as my elected official, I kind of know that you're not going to be a very good problem solver because you're calling the other party all these horrible names and no one's going to want to work with you. The margins are so close, in Congress, for example, that if you can't work with the other side, you're not going to be helping me as my elected representative. So I want people to see what contempt looks like, to feel icky when they hear it and feel worse when they use it and say, I'm just not going to do that anymore. I want contempt to win. I want contempt to lose, and I want dignity to win elections. I want dignity to win clicks. And we see this in kind of another fashion, Leigh, when you have like the what's it called? Upworthy and the good news, social media. People like seeing those things, and those are good and those are nice. We want to take it a step further and just make it the norm that we treat people with dignity. And I can disagree passionately. I can make really pointed comments and points about you and talk about how I don't agree with what you're doing because I think it's hurting, the policy that we have on immigration or whatever it might be. But I can do that without calling you a horrible person.
Right. I talk about, when I mentioned the white gloves, I also mentioned the boxing gloves. It seems like we vacillate between one or the other. And then I'm advocating for gardening gloves, which is getting in there. But I've been in the political arena, and I've felt like at times that I have to have my boxing gloves on. I felt like I have to fight for certain things and call things out when they're not right. And you're not saying not to do that. It's not like kumbaya, we are the world,
Right.
And, yeah, I think that's where people get lost in like, oh, we have to have unity all the time. Actually, we can disagree passionately like our forefathers did, right?
Yeah. Well, and the best kind of unity, in my opinion, when we go back to using that word, I'm going to use the analogy of singing in a choir. I sang in a very large choir, the Tabernacle Choir at Temple Square, formerly known as the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, right? You're in a 360 voice choir. And if we all sang the same part, the same note in the same octave, that would be like boring. It would be almost painful to listen to, but you have the different tones and timbres and voices, and you have dissonant notes. I mean, some of my favorite parts in some of the songs that we sang were when we had this dissonance that you lean into and then that resolves, and it's just beautiful. But think of that in our daily lives and in the variety, the diverse people that we live among, and the beauty that they bring to our conversations. When you bring those diverse voices together and work together, to me, the type of unity that comes from that is much stronger than something where everybody says and thinks the same thing.
Yeah. Now, I think some people too get a little nervous when you talk about this because, like, say you're a moderate, right? But let's say you have a strong conservative and they want certain values to be represented, and then they see too much compromise. That's happening a little bit in our state legislature. It's like, well, they feel lied to. They feel, and I think it causes them to be a little more tribal because it's like, wait, are you going to stay true to what you said you were going to do? You know?
Right. Well, and you raised a really good point there because one of the features of a 7, again, top of the Dignity Index scale, is being able to work with someone, hear their story, learn about it, and you may learn something new, and you may change your mind. You like when I was first on the city council and I had certain ideas about, budget things, and we're spending too much here, we're spending too much there. And then I got in and actually opened the books and I talked to people. I walked the neighborhoods. I went through our environmental health department and realized what it was we were actually doing. I realized I was wrong. I realized I didn't know what I thought I knew. And to be able to go back and say, I think I might have been wrong, you kind of risk your tribe saying you lied to us. It's like, I didn't lie to you, but I have met with people. I see things differently. And I wonder if there couldn't be a win-win for us, or a way that we accommodate diverse views in a different way. And that's where we're always looking for the higher ground. But it's hard. And when you live in a diverse society where I guess there are situations where, well, almost every situation, not everybody's going to get everything they want. And I think that's more of the classic compromise that we hear spoken of. But it's a very difficult and complicated, I'm going to say complicated, business to be in when we first of all approach everything as a zero-sum game. Someone's going to lose, someone's going to win.
And I mean, you can have complete dignity and be, we'll get it. Let's get into the dignity scale in just a minute here, but you can have complete dignity and be on any part of the political spectrum. It's not like you're going to be in the middle. I think that's right. A little bit of a misnomer. Like,
oh, absolutely. The governor I worked with, Governor Herbert, was the most conservative Republican I'd ever met. And his motto was, I'm conservative in principle, but moderate in tone and inclusive in process. Yeah. And so the way he talked to people and about people would have never, just never crossed the line. Mm-hmm. And when people disagreed with his policy, he would invite them in to meet with him. He would invite me to meet with people all the time. And sometimes I'd go, Governor, they don't share your position on this. And he said, I know, that's why you should probably meet with them. I want to find out why they don't agree. It's like, Governor, they don't even like you. One time I said, Governor, they're talking smack about you on the radio. He said, I know, that's why I really want you to meet with them and talk to them. He said, I want to see why they're so upset about this. And that's what he wanted. He invited that dialogue. And I think it made for much better policy on his part and our part to understand what those disagreements were. Because there were a lot of times when you tweak this one little part of the bill or this language, or in practice, maybe it could look like this. And that's all it took, really, to bring some other people in.
Right, because people's thoughts and ideas and opinions of you don't go away just because you don't look at them.
Right.
Right. We're living in a society together. We got to figure out what people think. And I think it's really wise of him to do that.
Yeah. And I kind of back to that same point about changing your mind as a society. And I make this point in my presentations, especially in education, like we have to allow someone to grow. We have to allow them to get more information and change their mind. If we don't let people change their mind, that's on us. It might mean we don't vote for them again if we don't like the direction they went, but we have to give them, this good faith effort that they learned and they changed their mind. People can change their minds, and not just automatically write them off and assume some negative. To me, it's always a temptation for me to say, oh, you're only doing that because you're blah, blah, blah. And I think of some horrible motive to ascribe to someone. It's like, no, maybe they just changed their mind.
Yeah.
And maybe I want to find out why they changed their mind because I voted for you. Explain to me what you learned that I am maybe not understanding. And a lot of times I will learn something new.
Absolutely. Yeah. So break down, let's see the dignity index and break it down for us here.
Yeah. So this is our dignity index. It's like this is it. This is the whole thing. And it's a scale that goes from 1 to 8. The bottom of the scale is contempt and the top of the scale is dignity. And it measures the language or the mindset that we use when we are in disagreement with someone. It doesn't measure everything. It's not going to measure our conversation unless I start being super ignorant to you, and then you're going to give me a low score. But it's meant to measure, like, how do we talk to each other when we disagree, when we're angry, when we're hurt? When we're hurt, that's a big one. When we're fearful. And at the bottom of the scale is full contempt. And at the top of the scale is full dignity. And if I'd love to walk you through it just really quickly.
Sure, go ahead.
And start in the middle of the scale. The 4 is the first step into contempt. It's this mindset where I think we're better than those people. They don't really belong. They're not one of us. And this theme of belonging is a huge thing. It drives our tribal politics. And to make someone feel like they don't belong, regardless of the situation, I talk a lot about it when I talk about education and schools. And when you see bullies and that kind of thing, it's like, these are kids who've probably been treated poorly to begin with and don't belong, and they're trying to find a way. And so a 4 is that first step in contempt. We're better than you. You don't belong. 3 is we're the good people and you're the bad people. It's us versus them. This is the zero-sum game. It's always us versus them. I'm good and you're bad. 2 is not only are you bad, but you're evil. Okay, those people are evil. They're going to ruin our country if we let them.
Right.
They're going to ruin public education if we let them. They're going to ruin my community if we let them. It's us or them. It's no longer us versus them. It's us or them. One of us has got to go. Mm-hmm. And when you get that far down, then the number 1, the bottom part of the index, all that's left is they're not even human. It's our moral duty to destroy them before they destroy us. I just saw a clip on social media a couple of days ago by a comment from a survivor of Auschwitz. And he said, words matter. Mm-hmm. Language matters. And when we start to call people names that are less than human and say we have to destroy them, he said, words matter. And it can lead to genocide. And we watch this in the language that we use politically. We have to wipe out that scum, or someone has said, I can't remember, during the campaign last year, it's like, when I get into office, I'm going to cut some throats. But that's clearly a 1, and you might not mean anything by it, but people that hear that are desperate to save our country, they show up at Justice Kavanaugh's house with a bomb, or right. Nancy Pelosi's house with a hammer, because they want to save our country. Anyway, I don't like that part of the scale. Yes. I try to live the top part. This is my goal every day. So a 5 is the first step into dignity. And that's when you say, look, the other side has a right to be here and a right to be heard. They belong here too. It's their country too. They belong here too. It's their school too. I don't hang out with them, but you do you. 6 is when you start to say, we always talk to the other side. I want to find those things we have in common so we can talk about those things, and we'll work on those areas of agreement. And which is a great place to be, a very good place to be. A 7 takes it up a notch when you say, we're going to fully engage and we're going to talk about those things we don't agree on, which is harder to do, because I want to find out where you got that value. I want to find out why you're so passionate about it. And then at 7, it says we discuss the values and interests we don't share, open to admitting mistakes or changing our minds. That's a very high
Right.
mark. There's a beautiful quote by Ben Franklin that I'm not even going to try and slaughter for you, like I did the John McCain
Yeah.
quote. But it was like the night that they signed the Constitution, and he gave this whole speech where he waffled, like throughout the speech. He said, I used to think it was this way, and I now though, now that I hear this, I think there might be a better way, because when I talk to people, I learned that other people have good judgment, and I'm just not sure. And this is Ben Franklin.
Yeah.
And then an eight, the top of the scale, we say that every one of us is born with inherent worth. So we treat everyone with dignity no matter what. And we call this the Desmond Tutu level, where you can see this little spark. We call it divine spark sometimes, but this spark of humanity in every individual. It doesn't mean I don't hold you accountable. It doesn't mean I don't argue with you. It doesn't mean that if you do something really, egregious, you are held accountable by the law and you might end up in prison. But it means I don't treat you like an animal
Hmm.
in prison, that you
Yeah.
have rights and dignity. And I try to always uphold that dignity.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you and I are people of faith, right? And I think
Yep.
that's where dignity comes from. In my mind, that's where dignity comes
Yeah.
from. It's a biblical principle. It's something that we inherently have, that I believe we
Right.
have as human beings.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting though. Not everybody who has faith and who would say that acts as though
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
It's
true.
hard.
Yeah.
This outrage industrial complex, we call it, that surrounds us is just so hard to see beyond that, because if I think people really are ruining the country, I don't see them as my brother or sister,
Right.
which my religion teaches that spiritually we're brothers and sisters, that we have the same God, that we came from, he's our father. It's like that's my spiritual and my religious tenet. But when everything surrounding me tells me that they're ruining the country, it's so hard for me to go back to what I've been taught, in my religion, and say, no, they are my brother or my sister. And
Right.
so they deserve dignity.
And you can vehemently disagree with what they're doing
Yes.
and actually believe that the choices they're making are not making things better. You can believe all of that.
Absolutely. And we actually practice. So you talked about this a little bit earlier, but in some of our workshops, we've added this new part of our workshop where we actually practice how would you respond? So we'll give a scenario. Usually I've been doing corporate scenarios or school board or public ed. Here's a scenario. How would you respond? And then we have people practice responding at a three, which is contemptuous. And that one's easy. Like that one's so easy to come up with because it kind of comes natural to us. It's like, you idiot. I can't believe that, da 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 da. And then we say, okay, now how would you respond if it were a five? Then they have to think a little bit harder. And then we say, what about a seven? If you wanted to give a seven response, how would you respond? And then it takes some thinking, but we want a passionate argument, strong
Mhm.
argument, but we want you to word it at a seven. How would you do that? And the fun thing is that they come up with really great arguments at a seven. And when it's a political example, what you do at a seven is that you're not criticizing the other side's president or the other side's leader, but you're making that passionate argument to where a lot of people on the other side probably agree with that, right? We're not like every Republican's not the same, every Democrat's not the same, and there are a lot of policies that people would agree with me on if I didn't condemn them first and talk about how horrible they
Absolutely.
were and how horrible their president was. It's
Yeah.
just, but so when you take that out, you gain people to your side.
Yeah.
And that's why we practice doing that.
I see people doing that all the time and it drives me nuts. People that are on quote unquote my side, I feel like they're just throwing it away because of how they talk to one another.
They are throwing away their shot.
Yeah.
Just let's talk about the actual issue and see how many people we can bring to that issue.
Yeah.
Because that's how we're going to solve the problem then. Because then I've got lawmakers on both sides that probably agree with that, who
Yeah.
aren't afraid to take it up now because we've not made it a
Right.
partisan issue.
Well, a good example is the school choice argument. I went to the legislature last month and we talked with them and the thing is it's always a lot of times it's framed as a public school versus, anti-public
Right.
school type of stance. But when you realize that actually the data shows that public school achievement actually goes up when you increase choices, then that becomes a completely different conversation. It's not an us or them thing. It's like, how do we educate our people as a whole, you know?
Right, right.
Yeah. It's a completely different conversation. And I feel like people do miss that. They kind of lose the fire though. It's like, well, if we're not fighting against something, what are we doing?
Yeah, right. And the thing is you've given a good example, but think about how many other situations. I'm going to use climate bills that are related to climate and the environment because there's a new caucus in Congress that is like a Republican-led caucus on environmental and climate issues because they've stripped out the rhetoric and they say, okay, what's important to everybody? And they've started to focus on those things and said, why can't Benji Backer is the leader of this organization, and he's young and he's got this whole different way of looking at it, very solid conservative Republican. He said, why can't we be the party of cleaning up the environment, certain things,
Right.
and you take the politics out of it, and there's a lot of people then that are interested in those issues,
Right.
and they've been very successful so far.
Yeah. We used to do these conversations in Anchorage, and we called them Brave Conversations. And at the end, we would have this turning point postulation that we would present, and we would say, if one thing were different about your stance, I might be able to agree with you.
Yeah.
Or if one fact was different,
Nice.
or like, is there any way that you might come over to my side if this was different? And that was a really interesting thing to think about because now we're putting our mental energy into, what would it take for me to change my mind?
Yeah, it's we've been approached by so many different groups that they find out about the index and they'll kind of download the card or go to our website and they'll say, "Oh, I need this in my business." And so we need this in our school board meetings have become very contentious. A lot of teachers have contacted us and they want to do it in their curriculum. They want to implement this into their AP government or their social studies curriculum. And so the main groups that we are working with right now are K-12, and we're in Alaska. We did the school board. I keynoted for the School Board Association in Alaska in November. So all of the local school board members and I think the superintendents were there, and some of the high school student leaders were there, and the student leaders have picked up on it. And so they've kind of been leading the way in Alaska, by the way. And so now we have student groups in Alaska and Utah and Oklahoma that want to bring the Dignity Index into their high school to be one of their clubs, like a Dignity Club.
Very cool.
So we have public ed, we have higher ed, with the free speech issues on campus that have been kind of boiling over the last few years. We've had people bring us onto campus and have workshops. Last year, we did 2 freshman orientation sessions, one at Colorado Mesa University and one at University of Wisconsin at Stevens Point, where they replaced some of the material they previously had in their freshman orientation. They've replaced it with the Dignity Index so that there's sort of this common language for incoming freshmen saying, these are our standards. This is the culture we'd like to set here at the university. So higher ed, public ed, higher ed, and then corporate. We're doing a lot of corporate work with businesses who want to improve their culture, that feel like they have a pretty good culture, but because of what's happening around us, again, with the politics kind of creeping into business, it's like, okay, we want to give our employees the tools that they need to talk about these things and to keep the business, and the goals of our business foremost while we're addressing some really difficult conversations. And so that work's been going very well, and traveling a lot with that. And then municipal organizations, so state municipal organizations, leagues of cities and towns, and state municipal leagues, locally elected officials. I last year had a fellowship with the Emerson Collective, and my project was to take the Dignity Index and apply it to women in politics as a way to recruit and to strengthen and support women in politics. And so I met with leaders, women elected officials all over Utah, and learned how they were using the Dignity Index as mayor, as city council person, as a school board member. I've got a little video, I'll send you the link. But they found, for women especially, who are turned off by the toxic nature of politics, a lot of people will tell me, a lot of women will say, yeah, I couldn't do that. I know we need more women in politics, but it's so awful. I can't do that. And I'm
Right.
going, actually, you can. I'm going to give you this thing. And
Because
it's
those
not
are the
about
people
pointing.
that we need there, right? The people
That's who we
that
need.
want
Yeah,
to
the
do it
people
right.
that that's right. The people that don't like it are the people we need, that don't like the toxicity. But it's people learn this as a way to score others. I teach people to score, but I teach them that so they can recognize it, but really so that they can turn that on themselves and go, okay, that's me. We like to say that when we use contempt, it's hard to see it. But once we see it, it becomes hard to use it. Once I spend 45 minutes with you and show you what that looks like, on your way home from the training, when you start to choose someone out and call them names, you're going, oh, that's a 3 on the index. I don't want to be it. I don't want to be on the contempt side of the scale. And
Yeah.
that changes people.
So when you're talking to someone, I know you gave that example of encountering someone who had that toxicity. Do you do that on a regular basis? Do you challenge people with their levels of toxicity, or do you
No,
just okay?
no, no. Well, let's put it this way. I don't challenge them with the index. Using the index as a club or a stick is not a good idea.
Right.
What even these women, these mayors that I've spoken with, they are so good. One mayor said that she puts an index on the seat of all of the council chairs, and then when people come in, she talks about it not as a way to say this is what you better do, but she said, I just want you to know that this is what you can expect from us. And so she's gently saying, I will treat you this way. But when I do hear some high levels of toxic, like, the gentleman that was at the state convention, that was a pretty low level, but I thought, I can't let this one go. You're making fun of my kids. We feel like it's important when you hear contempt, though, especially this really toxic contempt, we don't think it should be ignored. And we think you should be able to challenge contempt. I just wouldn't challenge it by saying, here's a scale and you're at the bottom of the scale.
Yeah.
I would challenge it in the ways that we practice, saying, it's really hard for me to hear you say that because I have a friend who is in this profession, for example, that you're talking. I have a teacher friend. And when you say all teachers are, doing whatever it might be doing, grooming our children that's really offensive to me. And I just need you to know that. I know that you're worried about your kids, just like I'm worried about my kids. And I think that's what's driving your language right now. But I need you to know that's really offensive to me because I know teachers and that's not what they're like. And that's a way I can challenge contempt without calling you evil or saying you're stupid, right?
Yeah.
But when you don't challenge, when you hear contempt and you don't challenge it, I go back to to genocide. When you don't challenge contempt, in some ways you are condoning it. So we have to find ways that we can stand up, especially for groups, in situations where they are being accused of things or called these horrible names. And we just need to soften up, our approach on that.
Yeah. And think about social media, it kind of gives us a license to
Mhm.
have contempt. And how do you deal with that on social media?
Um,
Do you go one-on-one and not deal with it
I've
publicly?
sent some private messages before, but it's what we try to do is respond. When I was a special ed teacher, there's different ways to improve behavior or to increase behavior. And one of those ways is to ignore, maybe a student's misbehavior or bad behavior that's just off task. You ignore it, but then you reinforce and
Yeah.
redirect and reinforce, the behavior that you want him to be doing. And so there's some things that that I will address generally, like my next post will be positive, or I saw this in the news. I disagree with that. Here's what I think about that. So we try to take the proactive, positive approach to that. But calling someone out individually again on social media, it's can sometimes be like a cesspool, and people are
Oh yeah.
they're just trying to drag you down,
Yeah.
and
And
where it's not a
people
personal
lose face on there
face on
because
there.
they can't it's in front of everybody. So like
Yeah,
when you're trying to correct somebody in front of the world, in essence,
yeah.
it's probably better, I found, to just have a different conversation,
Right. Well, yeah, that's exactly. And we tell people unfollow people.
Yeah.
Just say, "Oh, I'm sorry. I saw this on your post, and this is the third time I've seen this. You do you, but I disagree. Or just click on. You don't even have to make a statement about it.
Yeah,
I just unfollow people.
sure. And I've had people who might be toxic on my strand or whatever, and I'd be like, and this is why I'm deleting your comments. And then I've actually had people, the same people, come back and say it in a different way.
Yeah, right.
People do
And
change.
we suggest, I talked to a school board member once that, was faced with a really, really toxic comment in a public hearing that no one challenged it, or no one said anything in defense of the teachers. And we practice what that might look like. And it could be something, especially if you're in person, that you're going to have probably a better chance of getting the message across the way you want. But you could just say, look, I want the record to show, or the minutes to show, that I disagree with this comment. And Mr. So-and-so, I wonder if we could get together on Thursday. Maybe you could come to the office. I'd like to find out more about, your background. You're obviously super passionate about it. And I'm also passionate, but I disagree. Could we have a conversation about this? And then if they take you up on it, then there's some hope there, right? But to let someone like that continue to berate and degrade people in a public setting, if you have power to stop it, then I think that you use that power.
Yeah. I mean, with our freedom of speech, I so appreciate our freedom of speech. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't ever want to lose that. And I know, like, the Bible talks about, everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial. And so I think about freedom of speech in that way. Like, we can technically say whatever we want, and we should be able to. I mean, short of like threatening people or whatever.
That's right.
But at the same time, we want to do better.
Yeah.
And I think we're calling people gently to a standard that we hope that they'll realize is better, is higher,
Yeah.
the higher ground, not just the
Yeah,
common.
yeah. And to your point, that was the next point I was going to make about free speech. For one thing, we try to call people in and not call them out, right? I disagree with you. Can we get together? Can we have a conversation about this? So you call them in rather than call them out. But people, I do have not a lot, but I do have some comments saying this, you're just trying to censor free speech. And what we feel stops or inhibits free speech is contempt.
Absolutely.
Because when you're in a public hearing or you're in a meeting and it's super contemptuous, guess who's not going to get up and make a comment? The guy who disagrees with that, that's on the other side of the issue.
Exactly.
I've been in public hearings. I've conducted public hearings where, half the city comes up to oppose something and there's 3 people in the back that are in favor of it. And when the contempt starts flying, those 3 people never get up and give their opinion. Contempt shuts down free speech. Dignity opens up free speech. And Tom has a great way of putting this. He said that dignity allows you to say what you think in a way that lets other people say what they think. And contempt doesn't let you do that. So contempt, in our view, shuts down free speech.
Absolutely. That's so good. Have you, personally, has this affected you? Like, have you found yourself changing as a result?
Oh my gosh. Like crazy. Yeah, no, I look back on my days, like I loved being on the city council. It's been 20 years ago, but it was such a time of growth for me. And I was like, I'm nice. I am basically a nice person.
Yeah.
And people would always say, you're so nice. And, you would never, and I really would not throw people under the bus in public. I mean, I never was one of those people that I just said it myself. I was never one of those people. I was never a person that like chewed people out or, called them out, because I know how hard it is for people to come to public hearings, for example. But in my mind, like when I'm talking to someone else about an issue, like I'll talk to another council member, it's like, oh my gosh, who's going to be at that meeting tonight? So and so. And I'd roll my eyes. And even when you don't say it, but you think that, you stop yourself from coming up with solutions because you've already decided they're not worth listening to.
Wow.
So I do look back at thought patterns, my mindset that I wish I knew then what I know now. And even now, every day, I have to work on this every single day. I do better. For the most part, I live on the dignity side of the scale. There are some times when I'll creep down to a 4, but you quickly recognize it, and then you think, okay, I've got to think of this a different way. And I find that I give a lot of people a lot more grace. and the benefit of the doubt, and I expect them to give me grace and the benefit of
Right.
the doubt. And I have passionate arguments with my colleagues about, things that we're doing that before I would have tiptoed around. And so I don't know if I can
Right.
say that. I don't know if I can say this, but like we all have these ground rules that allow us to say things because we are treating each other with dignity.
I do feel that. I feel like when I respect somebody more, I will challenge them more,
Yeah, right?
which is the opposite of what you think.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, this is so great. And I mean, I'm convicted, I'm challenged, because you're saying don't just do this on the surface. Like do it
Right.
inside, do it in your heart.
Yeah.
That's what's going to
Yeah.
be the
And that's hard to do, but it's really rewarding. And I find that I see people differently. Like just from the get-go, when I travel, I'll see large groups of people, and I'm curious now about this person in the airport or that person or that, and I'm curious about their life. I see people completely differently than I used to. I was in the airport in DC last month, and there was a issue. There was something happening with an airport worker and a passenger in the check-in. Well, I was checking my bags, and there was this heated exchange. They were like going at it, and instead of going, "Ooh, I wonder what's going on." I was sick. I was sick. I was heart sick, thinking, "Oh my gosh, I wonder what happened. I wonder who treated or who said something that someone felt their dignity was violated. Can they please work it out?" And it's like I was just praying for them to work it out because I felt bad for both of them. I
right.
felt like someone has been hurt, and I hope they can see that, and I hope they can move beyond that. But like I would have never thought that before, and
Yeah,
that's how I start to see things now.
right. I think Brene Brown said something like, we have to come at people with the assumption that they're doing the best that they can.
Yes,
And even if it's
that's
not true,
dignity. That's dignity.
yeah, even if it's not true, it still benefits us to do that.
That's right. It's not going to hurt you to do that. Yep.
Yeah.
And there's
So,
boundaries. We talked about boundaries. You set boundaries, you learn, and there are things that you sometimes you just can't talk to that person, and you've been burned before, or it might be a toxic
sure.
relationship. And we tell people, look, you know your boundaries, and we're not asking you to be abused, we're not asking you
Right.
to be stepped on, but this is a different way of thinking that even helps you see those situations probably sooner and more clearly than you would have previously.
Well, this has been great. So how do people like what if people are just crying out for this in their business or whatever? How they get a
Yeah.
hold of you?
Well, first of all, I go to our website, dignity.us, take a look. There's a couple of ways you can be involved. We have a pledge that's kind of it's our American pledge, where you say the pledge is, as an American who knows and loves my country, I'm convinced that there's no America without democracy, no democracy without healthy debate, and no healthy debate without dignity. Therefore, I pledge to do more to treat others with dignity and not contempt. You can take the pledge, and if you take the pledge, you'll be added to my newsletter list. And we send out every week examples of what's happening all over the country, and then we have our email address on there. You can email me anytime. I have people email Dignity Index at unite.us. That's our catch-all. And then I just got a couple of requests already today for people that want us to speak to their organization or to their state. But yeah, we've got materials online. We've got a resource page on our website that has a lot of these resources, and we're adding more this month. So,
I would love to work with you guys more in Alaska if you're out here again.
okay,
So
let's do it.
yeah, I appreciate what you guys bring. We will
Well,
hopefully
thanks for
talk
the
to you
work that
again.
you're doing too. It takes all of us, right?
Absolutely. Same
So,
heart, same thoughts. That's really
yeah,
great.
yeah.
We'll see you next time.